Bit of a bad boy, huh?
Yeah. I just don't really see him as a bad boy.
Everyone, and welcome back to Grid Gals. We're on episode 27 this week, and since we don't have a race this weekend, we thought it might be fun to take a look at the difference between what we would call America's favorite racing sport. I don't know if it's our favorite racing sport here around the table, but everyone knows NASCAR is big in the US, and since we ourselves have not been NASCAR fans, and I wouldn't say that we are NASCAR fans today, it was fun for us to do a little bit of research to understand what really is the difference between NASCAR and F1.
I feel like after doing the research, I could be a NASCAR fan.
There is a lot of similarities, a lot more than I expected, but I don't want to say it until I actually watch a race. I think it's just the lack of changes on the track, and obviously I don't know all of the different circuits. Like, I didn't do that much research, but I think it would still be pretty boring to see cars just go in a circle. Like, I don't...
Well, you'd think that, but we'll get into a couple of different things. We'll talk about the differences in the cars and the race and the league. It's honestly, I was kind of surprised, and like now I genuinely really want to watch a race.
I think we should, because my brother went to a NASCAR race the other weekend and actually really enjoyed it. I also think we should dabble into IndyCar, but that's a later episode.
Yeah, that might be a bit much for one episode here, but I feel like the biggest difference is the car.
Agreed. I think even just looking at the car, you can tell.
Well, you know what I found out? NASCAR is an acronym.
Yes.
Like, I don't know why I don't know, it has car in it. I just figured it was some weird word.
I had no idea.
I never questioned it, to be honest. I didn't question it.
But what does NASCAR stand for?
Okay, so NASCAR is short for the National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing. Like, I don't know how I didn't know that. I did
not know. I mean, it's all caps, so I assumed it was abbreviation for something, but I didn't realize that was it.
I mean, I'm a big fan of Talladega Nights, The Ballad of Ricky Bobby, so...
Oh, what a classic.
Who is it?
The dinner table scene, that lives in my head rent-free, for sure.
Hot take, best Will Ferrell movie. Beats Anchorman by far.
I do like it better than Anchorman, but I don't know if...
What about Step Brothers?
I'm like, Step Brothers is a classic.
You have seen Step Brothers, but did not pay attention.
I have seen Step Brothers. I need to rewatch it.
You do.
In my mind, it's Talladega Nights or honorable mention here for Blades of Glory, but also, again, little biased as a former figure skater myself.
I don't like Blades of Glory.
I'm not a huge Blades of Glory. I'm not a huge Elf.
Oh, no,
I love Elf.
I can skip Elf.
Yeah.
Oh my god, Elf is a classic.
Well, I don't really like Christmas movies in general, to be fair.
I'm not a big Christmas movie gal.
So before our listeners literally stop listening to us because they think we have no souls and we hate Christmas, back to NASCAR?
Sure. So I think if we start at the car, even just looking at the car, there are going to be some pretty big differences. But both cars were designed to be very aerodynamic for the type of race that they're doing, which I thought was interesting. Because I feel like we always look at NASCAR cars and we're like, okay, they're bigger, they're bulkier, they have to go slower, and they're not as soundly built. Not the case at all. So NASCAR cars, which I'm going to say a ton, and I'm already annoyed by the fact that I have to say NASCAR car.
Stock car.
Okay, sure. NASCAR stock cars?
No, because it's the National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing. So they're stock cars.
Okay, so stock cars are bulkier, but for a couple reasons. When you look at it, it's actually more secure. So F1 cars, as we all know, don't have any covering over the cockpit. You just have the chassis and the cockpit. But then an actual NASCAR car is... I can't go without saying it. A stock car has a chassis, but it's over a shell, or shell's over the chassis. And there's a cage inside, which protects the driver when you drive. When cars roll, much safer for the driver. So obviously, F1 is a little bit more dangerous for the driver than NASCAR.
I also read that not only is it safer because of like rolling accidents, it's also safer because that shell and having a windshield really, like we've talked about it in previous episodes, the amount of G-force you experience and the neck strength required.
Yes.
It's very different.
Right, you don't have that at all.
Yeah.
For the stock cars.
They don't need to train their necks. Like, I think one of our friends just sent us a really funny video today of George Russell. What was it, like 30 kilograms or something weights, just like leaning over a bench, just trying to hold his head up. I mean, like, you'd think it was fake if it wasn't an F1 driver.
Right.
So NASCAR drivers skip neck day?
I suppose, yeah.
You could say
You
that.
wouldn't need it. I think they're still pretty fit, obviously, because it's still a sport, but probably not their necks. The other thing I thought was interesting about the chassis is that they buy them from an automotive manufacturer, and it's only like a few that ever make them. So there's only a few types of chassis out there on the grid, whereas Formula One chassis are obviously built every year from the team, and none of them can be the same. So you don't have like Red Bull being the same as AlphaTauri, something like that. But I also think that makes the cars a little bit more similar, so it does come down to more of the driver's skill than the car. So there's also not that big of a difference with the engines that they use.
What are the engine suppliers? Is it the same, similar suppliers as F1?
So the suppliers for NASCAR are Ford, Toyota, and Chevy, which is the same thing, I believe, with the chassis.
Okay.
And it's interesting because they actually call them stock cars because the automotive manufacturers are building them as the car for the future. So they're trying to test out cars that they would see on the road. And that's why they are so similar to normal road cars.
Okay. Very interesting.
But I wonder how much data they actually glean from NASCAR data.
So we'll get into that, but there's a specific rule in NASCAR about how you can use the data.
Oh.
So that part's a little different than F1, and we'll get into that in a minute. But I do wonder, I didn't get super into the exact types of data they collect just because there's a lot of it that they can't necessarily use, at least in the race itself.
Got it.
So, interesting. Yeah, I wonder.
Yeah, so I like that with all of those, the cars are a little bit more similar. The other thing I thought was kind of odd is that they only have 2 different types of tires. So I don't know who did research on strategy, but there's so much strategy that comes into play with F1 tires because they have 7 different types of tires, including the wet tires. So NASCAR only has dry and wet tires.
Yeah, it really simplifies it. And I think speaks to your earlier point, like it really does come down to the driver's skill most of the time. If a lot of the variables that would set different teams apart aren't in play. Interesting, and that kind of feeds into some of the stuff I did of how the actual races and championships work. It makes more sense why, like, it seems a little bit more individualistic than F1 because it sounds like there's not a lot of differentiators between teams and some of the equipment and the strategy that they're doing.
Yeah. The final thing I found that was really interesting about the cars is, so everyone always says when we're watching NASCAR, oh, they only turn left. But the cars really only turn left. Apparently they don't handle well, even in a straight line or turning right. They're designed to turn left, obviously very well, because it has to stay in a whole race turning left. But if they go in a straight line, it's not very easy to do.
Well, that's a pretty good segue because, again, I feel like one of the reasons I originally wasn't a huge fan or didn't want to get into NASCAR was, it's the same thing, right? Like, all the tracks are the same. They're actually not.
Yeah.
So most tracks are the traditional oval that you would see, when you kind of picture a NASCAR race. But there are a couple, like they do a couple of different street circuits. It's, again, pretty rare. And we were talking about how next year they're going to come to Chicago. But they have one track that is shared with F1. So because of the different types of racing that they do, F1 tracks are all different. There's not a single track that's the same. They race all over the world. Some are on circuits, some are on the street. And we've kind of talked about how that impacts drivers from like a mental standpoint, especially with the travel. All of the NASCAR tracks are either in the US or Canada, and they're all nearly identical. But the one track that both F1 and NASCAR race on, can you guys guess?
Is it not COTA?
Yeah. I was going to say, I would really hope you get it. It's the one track we've been to. Yeah, they both race at COTA. And so I really want to watch the NASCAR race at COTA. And for those who aren't familiar with that acronym, that's the Circuit of the Americas in Austin, Texas. So
we should absolutely watch that.
Yeah.
Because now I'm curious if they don't handle turns well, especially with the Chicago race coming up. Like, that's going to be even more interesting to watch then, because I think that should be a race that we go to. If it's in our backyard.
Oh my God, yeah.
100%.
We should absolutely go.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I feel like you guys are going to be able to see it from your apartment.
I don't think so. It's going to be in the...
It's pretty far south.
It's in Grant Park.
Oh. They're not coming up that far?
No.
It's just around Grant. That would be really cool.
Oh, damn.
Yeah.
I thought they were using more of Lakeshore. Well, that actually makes sense, and I probably should have guessed it wasn't going to be that long, because NASCAR tracks are typically much shorter than F1 tracks. And to...
Really?
Yeah. Like, for example, the shortest F1 track is Monaco, and it's 3.1 kilometers. The shortest NASCAR track is the Martinsville Speedway, and it's only 1 kilometer. And so to give you an idea, of what that looks like in lap times, the average lap time at Monaco is 1 minute and 14 seconds. The average lap time at Martinsville Speedway is 20 seconds.
Oh my God.
That's
But then how many laps do they do?
Exactly. Yeah. So then to the next point, NASCAR does way more laps. And so the average NASCAR race is about 200 laps compared to like 50 to 70 for F1.
Which makes sense with the cars, because they said that the NASCAR stock cars are more durable, so they can last longer, whereas F1 cars are like pretty sensitive because they have to be really nimble and have so many different setups. Whereas with a stock car, you're only really doing that one type of track, but you have to be able to last.
Yeah, it's way more, and you know, for us Americans who deal in miles, the average F1 race is roughly like 200 miles. I mean, the Daytona 500, that's 500 miles. That's more than double, you know? So very different. And the other thing I thought was interesting is the time it takes to complete a race. Like you were saying, F1 races are not only shorter, but they literally have to be faster. You know, they time out after 2 hours.
Right.
NASCAR averages about 3 hours, but there is no upper limit. Like, if something happens, they go until the race is complete. They don't time out. Like, that's just not a thing for NASCAR. You know, so I think it's one of those things where, like, we've seen that in F1 where if there's weather or just an incident on the track and the race gets delayed, you can have a race where you don't finish all of the laps. I mean, we've even seen that this season. In NASCAR, you go until you're done.
That makes sense with what I've just heard about attending a race, because I've heard that you can be there for hours. Like, and that would make sense if there's weather or just for whatever reason the cars are taking a little bit slower than normal. That's insane. I feel like that is a marathon, just watching racing for like 5 hours.
But also for the teams and drivers to be that on your game for that long, that would be exhausting.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, I don't know exactly how much it physically impacts the drivers, like F1, you know, and what we just said, especially the G-force, like, I don't think an F1 driver could probably do a race much longer than they already are. Like, it already seems so physically taxing, where I think even just having that windshield gives your body that much more of a break.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, for the team and the pit crew and everyone else supporting you, which we realize here at Grid Gals, it's not just the drivers, it's the pit crews. And the pit stops in NASCAR are way different. Like, for example, you can have an F1 race where you only have one pit stop, right? NASCAR, it's like an average of 6 or so, or even more.
Oh my God.
Because they refuel.
Yeah, that's a key thing.
Like F1, you're forbidden from refueling during the race. NASCAR, you have to.
Right.
And you also don't have the requirement of changing types of tires like you do in F1, but sometimes they don't even change all the tires. You can have pit stops where they may only change like 2 of the 4.
That's crazy.
Yeah, or you'll have some where they don't change the tires at all and they might just throw a little extra gas in, and they call those splash and goes. Yeah, which I'm like, that's wild, you know, that you can have all these different types of pit stops, almost where obviously if there's an incident in an F1 race and you have damage, you might like change the front wing or something, but I mean, to only change like 2 out of your 4 tires.
And that seems like a much different type of pit stop for all the teams, and pretty dangerous because there's so many different types of pit changes
Well, and the fuel.
Yeah.
Like, you got, you have fuel.
Yeah, because they used to refuel in F1, and there's a lot of terrifying videos out there of these cars catching on fire and drivers. I know, like, I saw one of, like, Jos Verstappen ages ago, but...
God.
It's insane.
And I feel like that must add to the overall time.
It sure does.
You can't pump gas that fast, even if you're just doing a splash and go. I mean, at one point you got to refuel the whole. I'm sure you have to fill up the tank.
Okay, well, here's another fun one for you ladies.
Average pit stop. Let's hear it.
For F1, it's about 2 to 3 seconds. Can you...
Who holds that title of the fastest?
We're talking about averages. We're talking about averages. It's Red Bull at 1.82. Thank you very much. I know that stat. I'm doing my best crofty over here. But anyway, can you guess how long the average NASCAR pit stop is?
Average?
A range.
Like 30 to 45 seconds?
No way. I feel like it would have to be like minutes then. If you're refueling a whole car, I'm gonna go 85 seconds.
Final answers?
Well, like the average, because you're not refueling every stop.
Yeah, but that brings down the average, I would think, so significantly.
But if you're doing a tire change some stops and you're doing refueling, it's probably somewhere in the middle. Like, I'm gonna stick with 45 seconds.
What is it?
You guys are both wrong. It's 12 to 16 seconds.
Oh shit. Okay.
But they must have like maybe a mechanism to get fuel into the car faster than like a
I'm
normal
sure.
pump.
Yeah, than us at like the pump. Okay.
Our local Sunoco. No, it's not that bad, but I mean, compared to them, that's like 4 times as long.
Yeah.
It's also very different in terms of like track position and how they race.
Sure, yeah.
Because one of the other big differences of the tracks is that they're so much wider.
Right.
They're way wider, and unlike F1, where making contact is prohibited from a rules standpoint, it's encouraged in NASCAR. It is a strategic decision that people do to grind up against other teams' cars to slow them down. Like, that is part of your strategy. And so...
Interesting.
This makes sense why Kimi Räikkönen just moved into NASCAR.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's gonna be... I've also heard that, like, sometimes, again, I'm not familiar with the team structure in NASCAR, but there's a way that they, like, catapult each other.
Yeah, slipstreams. No, and, like, okay, there's definitely rules in F1. I mean, you see people do it, but you're not allowed to, like... There are rules in F1 that are supposed to discourage doing a slipstream, basically. In NASCAR, no. Like, again, that's another strategic decision they make where, like, they will be right up against their bumper and using that.
That's insane.
I think that might be the biggest differentiator between F1 and NASCAR is the lack of rules that NASCAR has.
Well, it's not the lack of rules. They're just different rules.
No, because, like, for building the car, there are, like, hardly any rules for the type of car that you bring into NASCAR versus F1. And, like...
Well, I feel like that's the difference between, like, a stock car and, like, a constructed. You know, because I feel like part of, we've talked about F1, is the actual, like, engineering. And, like, that's its own competition.
Right.
Which I'm excited to, when we get to the points, I do have a couple other, like, fun strategy things. Okay, so because it's wider, because they can touch each other, there are way more overtakes in NASCAR. And here, I thought this was crazy, but for reference, in the 2011 season of F1, there were 80 overtakes total, all season. In one NASCAR race alone that year, there were 88.
That's insane.
Yeah, like, you'll have more overtakes in
That'd
one
be
race
fun.
than the whole season.
Yeah, see, I think that would be fun to watch then.
Yeah. So I feel like that's what keeps it exciting for that long, and that's why, like, the pit stops play less into strategy because there's way more overtaking on the track. So track position isn't as where, you know, like certain races we've seen, it's so hard to overtake in F1 that so much of it comes down to, like, your pitting strategy.
Right.
Where, you know, in NASCAR, there's, like, get in, get out, slam into them, like, whatever. And because of that, because, you know, like you were saying, a lot of left turns, the way drivers train is different too. There's not nearly as much braking. Like, they're incentivized to not brake.
Right.
And they're incentivized to almost, like, slide around corners a little bit so that they don't lose as much speed. But we've seen that in F1, like, I mean, to your boy Danny Rick, like, late breaker, right? That was his whole brand for a while.
Oh, do you see how she already put that in past tense?
Sorry. My God, Jack's
There has
gonna murder
been no
me.
official statement. All right. I just hope that like everything gets proven wrong, and you guys are all eating your words in 2 weeks, and Catherine's running up those.
Okay,
stairs.
but like, I mean, to be fair, has anyone called him a late breaker in a while?
So tell me about it.
Yeah, so anyway, the final point I'll make from a strategic decision, and this is what I was referencing earlier with the data.
Mm-hmm.
So NASCAR bans telemetry, which I had to Google that myself. I will fully admit this. It basically means like reacting to data in real time. So where in F1, you know, we see them constantly. You have strategists, they're on their laptops, they're looking at all the data, they're talking to the drivers. Drivers are making adjustments live during the race. NASCAR, you better hope that your team optimized your car before you started, because once you're out there, you're on your own. You can't make any changes to the car, no adjustments once the race starts.
What?
Like between races, I think you can. You can take some of the data from the last race, but when you're out on the track, they can't like, you know, where you're like switching. You see that a lot in F1 about like, okay, like,
Yeah.
you know, plan B, plan this, and they're making like micro adjustments with all that programming in the car, or they're looking at the data, you know, talking to their engineers. Apparently in NASCAR, you have to have all of the settings finalized before the race starts, and that's what you race with.
Do they still talk to the race engineer? Is that still a thing? Like, you know how in F1 you talk to your race engineer during the race?
Yeah, so the driver, the crew chief, spotter, and a couple other team members, including usually the owner, can all talk to each other on radio. And I guess there's been some...
That sounds chaotic.
Yeah, right? Like, imagine the owner getting on and basically, I'm just picturing, like, you're having a bad race.
Yeah.
And you get a stern talking to, because I'm looking at something really quick here. Apparently, there have been discussions around, like, should that radio chatter be public or private?
Oh, public. Public all the way.
I love the radios.
I love the radios.
The radios are the best part.
They give me life.
I know. Oh, my God. Yeah. So, a lot of differences in how you race.
Right.
But...
I guess if there's not as much differentiation between the cars, it makes a little bit more sense why you wouldn't maybe need to make as many adjustments.
Yeah, that's true.
So that could be, but I wonder too if they have I wonder if there are more DNFs because they can't make really any adjustments to the car. Or if it's just down to a science now where it's like, that's just not something that's really needed because it's a stock car versus an actual
I wonder if there's
constructed
more DNFs because they can smack into each other.
Probably, probably, and honestly, it makes sense, right? Like just thinking about it, like Americans love contact sports.
We
I
do.
do.
Yep.
So this makes so much sense. I mean, I'm intrigued. I kind of want to watch now.
I think we gotta watch Coda.
We do. Absolutely.
It's a good place to start.
Yeah, we should absolutely watch Coda. I think this is a great segue into talking about what the NASCAR season looks like and the different types of series in NASCAR, because there are 3 different types of series. So they have the Cup Series, which is what I would equate as very similar to F1. And like that's the top series. That's the one that probably most people are watching. Then they have, because in the US we love selling the rights to naming series, the Xfinity Series. So that's the next, I would say, right under the Cup Series.
Yep.
Oh my gosh, wait, that's the one that Sebastian, our hot lap driver, is in, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. And drivers who are racing in like the Cup Series or the Xfinity Series, you can race in different series throughout the season. And a lot of drivers actually do.
Really?
What?
Yeah, which is that's another thing. It's not like you see F1 drivers dropping down to F2. Like,
Are they like different levels of driving? Like, I guess, is it comparable to like an F1, F2 where you try to move up through them?
from what I can tell, yes, you would want to be at the Cup Series, but I'll get into this a little bit later. There are certain races that they do in the Xfinity Series and the third series, which is called the Camping World Truck Series.
Oh my God.
That's so American.
It's so American.
Like, you can't make that up.
No, you cannot. I love the names. And there are certain races, because there's not as many formal races for this series. They have races where if you win the race, you get a monetary incentive as a driver. So like if you win, you get like $50K or something out, like something higher depending on the track. So a lot of racers will like drop down and do those races, but I'm not 100% sure how it works and all of the rules on like how many races you can race in. If you're like a Cup Series driver, can you always go down to Xfinity? We'll have to ask Sebastian because I have no idea.
Like, I feel like that wouldn't be fair.
That'd be so unfair. Be like, if I'm an F2 or the Xfinity Series, and I'm super excited to try to race in this whatever on the circuit that has like a prize, and then someone above me is just like, nope. Nope. I'm gonna take your seat. See ya.
I don't think there are like a limited number of. I don't know how that works too, because there's a lot more, I would say, seats or entry people. So it's not like the coveted 20 seats, right? There's so many more drivers that could potentially enter.
Yeah.
I imagine they have a cap, but I don't know how that works or how if the people in the series get the priority, and if one doesn't want to do it, then they can bring in someone from the Cup Series. I have no idea. To be transparent. If you have any idea, let us know. We'll post a follow-up on our Instagram. So for the Cup Series and the Xfinity Series, it's the same pretty much season as the F1 season. There are 26 races for each of those series. For the Cup Series, they usually race on Sundays, so same as F1. And Xfinity Series, they race on Saturdays, and this is where it's interesting. So a lot of the Cup Series drivers will race in the Xfinity Series, and it almost feels to me like it's their practice round. Like they're getting experience on the track, because I don't know if they have like the same formal practice sessions as F1 does. And then the Daytona 500 is the race that kicks it off, and many of the same tracks are used for the Xfinity Series. So they're usually racing the same weekend, same track. There are some differences, there's some exceptions. And then this is the other big difference. There's a regular season and then there's playoffs. So during the regular season, all of the drivers are competing to get the playoff spot. So for the Cup Series, there's the top 16 at the end of the regular season advance to the playoffs. And for the Xfinity Series, the top 12 drivers advance.
Wait, I love that. That's so fun.
Yeah.
And that feels way more comparable to like most other major league sports here in the US. You know, I feel like every MLB, NHL, NFL, like they all have a playoff. So I guess it makes sense that NASCAR does. Wait, I want F1 to have playoffs. Like a little bonus season.
God, now I want to make a bracket.
NASCAR bracket?
Oh, with like F1 drivers. I don't know any NASCAR drivers.
Oh, that would be fun of who we think would make the playoffs.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's just basically like I'll explain the points and everything, but the last race is the top 4 drivers from a point standpoint, because they eliminate eliminate drivers throughout the playoffs, and that's so fun. Can you imagine if there wasn't all the noise and the top 4 drivers from last season were racing at the end?
Wait, so there's only 4 cars on the track?
Yeah, there's
That's
only 4
wild.
cars on the track.
That's fun.
But I almost feel like that's a little less exciting.
Maybe.
You know, because I feel like a lot of the exciting races we've seen, at least in F1, it's not necessarily the main drivers who provide the excitement. I.e., I'm thinking about like even Abu Dhabi of last year, right? That whole incident happened because Latifi crashed, right? So if Latifi wasn't even on the track, I think like Lewis may have won.
But if the top competitors could hit each other in their cars... Bro. I best believe Hamilton would have been out ages ago.
I don't know. He's sneaky. I mean, you saw him at Cup's Corner.
I mean, it felt like they were already doing that last season.
Is it too soon? That was last season.
I mean, it feels like they already do that anyway.
Yeah, that's fair.
They're just out for the rest of the race.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like an ordeal and like kind of a witch hunt afterwards.
Yeah.
It's very dramatic.
Yeah.
As I feel like most things in F1 are.
That's fair. What else you got, Jackie?
So, can you guess what the longest race is on the schedule?
Daytona 500. Indy 500. No, shit. They're both 500. Oh my god.
Those are 2 of the crown jewel tracks, though. They have, like, very famous ones.
Well, it's gotta be something that's longer than 500.
So Coca-Cola sponsors it. It's the Coke 600.
Of course.
And of course it's the longest one.
It's the longest race. 600 laps, and it's in Charlotte. So I know we already talked
That's
about doing
only funny because Coke's, like, based out of Atlanta.
Oh, Atlanta would be a good one to have a track.
Yeah.
Well, and I know that, like, NASCAR is based out of Charlotte. Most of the drivers all live in Charlotte and whatnot, but I'm surprised the Coca-Cola race is not in Atlanta.
Yeah, interesting. I don't know if they have a track in Atlanta or not, but we'll have to follow up. So, like I said, Cup Series and Xfinity Series, very similar. So the Camping World Truck Series, it is lighter scheduled. There's only 15 races for the season. However, they have what they're called these performance bonus events. So it's not like they're just doing 15 races. And one of the most famous ones called the Trip Truck Challenge.
Say that 5 times fast.
Seriously.
And what I can tell from it is basically the reason why it makes it special is there's a monetary incentive for whoever wins. They have a prize for the winner, the second place, and it sounds like it's a couple of races back to back to back to win. And in this series too, the playoffs are smaller. There's only 10 drivers that advance to the playoffs. All right, so you get points throughout the season for a variety of different things. You get points for being on the stage, which there's 2 stages, stage 1 and stage 2. And I believe the top 10 drivers are in stage 1. And I think there's a lot more on stage 2. But essentially, depending on what place you get rewarded some points. And I think it's more points per race than an F1 race.
Also, I would just like to say, for as much as Americans like to complain about, like, participation trophies...
I was just about to say the same thing.
Like, are you kidding me? That you all get to go on stage? You just don't get to go on stage 1?
That's ridiculous. Who needs to see 10... Yeah.
10 people? How does that stage even look?
How messy.
Is it elevated?
Do they spray champagne? I feel like they probably still do. But who gets champagne? All 10 people get champagne?
It's probably Busch Light.
How did we not figure this out in all of our research?
I think we just have to watch one.
I agree.
We'll have to watch and follow up because I'm unsure about the stages. But essentially, you're on a stage, you get points. You get bonus points to... There's a weird thing where you get points, then you get bonus points for the playoff, and I'm not really sure how all of it works. But you get bonus points for being on the stage, in addition to the points for the place that you place in the race.
Oh my goodness.
And then you get additional bonus points if you win, which I'm like, why is it not just included in the initial points that you get?
You got a lot of tongue twisters today over there, Jack.
Yeah, it's
You're doing great, though.
Yeah.
I do it for the Grid Gang.
Gang, gang, gang.
It's not easy. Someone's got to do it. And then if you win, whoever wins the regular season gets additional points. And those are important because that's how they rank them in order for the playoffs. And I think there's an incentive, not an incentive, but there's some sort of advantage to having more points. Probably where you start in the playoff race or something along that nature. And it's elimination throughout, so...
Well, and one thing that I forgot to mention, but I think really matters here now that we're talking about the points, is that there are way more cars on the field in general. And I think we kind of referenced this earlier, but I forgot that I had the exact number, which is you can have up to 40 cars, where in an F1 race, it's only 20.
Right.
And so really crowded field, especially if you're all bumping each other. But I feel like from a points perspective, that makes sense why you would have more points awarded, you know, if there's more drivers in the field.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So I think it would make more sense probably if we watched a race.
Yeah.
Because to me, right now, like, reading it was really difficult to follow, and I think it would all bring more clarity if we just watched one.
I agree.
What current F1 driver do you think could also be in NASCAR and do NASCAR well?
Can we not say Kimi Räikkönen?
No, current F1 driver.
Alonso.
Yeah, I think Alonso would be great.
I think Alonso would be really good.
Who do you think would be the worst? Well, Mary, give me your best.
I know, I'm trying to think.
Who do you think can beat Jack's driver then? Alonso.
Okay, well, I didn't realize we all had... You have to pick one then. That's also not who I pick. We all have to pick separate ones, and you can't pick Max Verstappen.
Why not?
I think outside of Alonso, the best current F1 driver who would
For
do
NASCAR.
well in NASCAR, I'm going to go with Checo.
Oh!
Because I think Checo's a little cheeky sometimes and a little sneaky. Especially, I feel like there have been a number of incidences in which, A, maybe Checo's tapped someone and kind of gotten away with it. And B, I feel like he's also gotten tapped quite a few times and handles it well. So I feel like in terms of tapping people. And I've seen him recover some like pretty big slides. So I'm gonna go with Checo.
I might choose your guy Vettel.
I mean,
because I feel like he drives a lot of different types of cars. Like, I think he collects cars and drives his own. So I feel like he would have some experience.
the video that came out at the beginning of the season from Aston Martin of both him and Lance Stroll, like, drifting vintage Aston Martins around a track.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I just gotta say, if you're not a Vettel fan, Google it, watch it, you will be. Okay? That's all I'm gonna say. That's all I'm gonna say.
She had to get her Vettel plug-in.
I mean, come on.
I mean, you started
an unrelated episode.
You teed it up for me. I'm not gonna not swing.
I feel like Magnussen also might be good.
Oh,
That's
you're
a great,
so right.
yeah.
I think
yeah.
he would be really good.
And also, he has the attitude for it.
Oh, yeah.
Or like maybe Latifi, since he's already bumped into days.
Worst driver, honestly, I'm gonna go with Lewis.
I was going to say that.
Just
Yeah.
because he is, I think why he excels is he's such a like technical finesse driver.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that level of finesse, no, you can't, you're not gonna cut it.
No.
And he's also just been in F1 so long. And I feel like when he does something, he does it like 100%, right? So I think it would be really hard from him to adjust to a new style of driving. And I kind of equate it to, I dove one year in high school, and we would have gymnasts. And they were obviously amazing. They had a lot of what you would think of perfect skills for diving, except the one biggest change is in diving, you can land on your hands.
Right.
And in gymnastics, you can't. And so for them, like, there was such this big mental thing to get over, like, I can go in on my hands. Mm-hmm. It was easier to do a double than like a 1.5. Mm-hmm. And I feel like Lewis into NASCAR would be like the same thing. Like, you would think maybe he would be good because he's such a good driver, but I feel like his driving style is like so specific to F1 that it would be hard for him to adjust. That's my hot take.
I don't think he really likes like aggressive driving, because that's why the battle between Max and Hamilton was such a big deal. And now when it's Max and Leclerc and they have more similar driving styles, it's not that, I don't know, torn apart. I feel like people were like really going in on that.
He's too bougie. He would not do well in NASCAR. I didn't like.
You can't picture Lewis Hamilton with a Busch Light.
I cannot. I simply cannot.
In the Camping World Truck Series.
It's now for him. Like, in the kindest way possible. I don't think he would do well.
Who do you think would be the worst driver?
Probably Albon.
Why?
Yeah.
You know how I feel about Albon. He seems like kind of like, he's not as gritty as other F1 drivers are. And I feel like you have to be like extra gritty to be a NASCAR driver.
Mm-hmm.
Bit of a bad boy, huh?
Yeah. I just don't really see him as a bad boy.
All right, Jack, who's your worst? Who's the worst?
That's who I was gonna pick. Lewis. I feel like Yuki would do well. I think.
No, we're saying who would do
Worst.
bad.
I know. I'm just like I'm running through the list in my head, and I'm like trying to think.
I mean, Yuki certainly has the temperament for NASCAR.
Yeah. I think it would be a really good outlet for him. I think if F1 doesn't work out, I think he should consider NASCAR.
I want to put that man behind a stock car for sure. Just
Absolutely.
let him rip.
I think he would do great things. I feel like Leclerc. I don't see him as being super aggressive most of the time. I think we've gotten a unique view on some of his angst, but I think that's more towards the team than like some of the other drivers. I wouldn't see him doing well in NASCAR.
Well, hey, maybe wait till the end of the season if Ferrari keeps screwing him over. He might be angry enough to start slamming other cars.
That's true. I mean, he's got potential. I still think Lewis would be the one if you hadn't taken it. But Danny Ricks raced in a NASCAR car. I hate saying both.
Mm-hmm.
Before. I could see Lando doing well. Like, I don't think he would be the best. It would be the best switchover from him, but I don't think he would be the worst.
I think maybe Stroll might do kind of well.
Yeah, I was thinking about that.
Because if you don't have to use your mirrors, You can just
You really
hit
don't.
whatever you want and actually just like blame it on strategy. You can be like, oh, I hit that car because I wanted to.
And also, you only have to really turn one way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, this might be Stroll's. You should pivot to NASCAR.
Stroll
think
sport.
so.
And then if you have a slower pit stop, you know, you can just get back out there and slam your way to the front.
And NASCAR's not as expensive, so I'm sure his dad can really pick up the tab pretty easily on that one. That's probably just like another one of their houses.
God, what can you imagine?
I don't want to. But I feel like with this, now we just have to watch a COTA experience through a NASCAR lens.
I also kind of want to watch one that's on an oval track. Like, I for sure want to watch COTA and compare it. But I also just want to watch, like, a creme de la creme. You know? The crown jewel.
Do you want to watch the Daytona 500? I feel like we have to watch the Indy 500.
Yeah. You have a brother in Indy.
Yep.
Let's hook it up.
So
David, this is us not so subtly asking to come stay with you.
Daytona's passed. I don't know when Indy is. It might have already passed, too.
Oh, that's recorded somewhere.
Next year. We'll throw it on the calendar.
Yeah.
Plan ahead. Well, thanks everybody for listening today. I know this was a bit of a switch up from our normal F1 talk, so if you enjoyed us breaking down NASCAR for you and other types of motorsport, let us know. We're also happy to, take some feedback, maybe get into IndyCar in the future. We'll have to see where the wind blows us, but feel free to leave us a comment on any of our social medias. Visit our website, gridgals.com. We'd love to hear from you. And again, anywhere that you get your podcasts, please leave us a review, like, and subscribe.
And since there's still a checkered flag in NASCAR, that's a checkered flag for this session. We'll see you back on the grid next week.